Hi, I'm Thalassa. At Christmas dinner, my sister raised her glass and joked, "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." Everyone laughed, even my mother. But that wasn't the worst part. It was the years before that moment, the silent edits, the erased photos, the gifts that were returned, unopened. I kept showing up, until I didn't. So what happens when you stop waiting to be seen, and start seeing yourself instead? Would you have stayed? Or would you have left the table too? Let's talk about it. I hadn't seen the front of the house in 2 years, but it looked the same. White trim glowing under the soft haze of Christmas lights, wreath on the door, a little crooked like always, thanks to that loose nail Dad never bothered to fix. The air smelled of pine and cold, and the driveway was slick from fresh snow that no one had shoveled. I stood there longer than I should have, holding my overnight bag, trying not to look like someone who needed to take a breath before ringing her own mother's doorbell. Marva opened it before I could knock. Her smile was wide and shallow, like the last bit of wine in a glass that had sat too long. "Well, look who finally made it. Thought you weren't doing family anymore." I smiled just enough to get past her. Traffic was better than I expected. She stepped aside, barely, and I brushed past her into the house. The familiar scent of cinnamon and roasted ham hit me like a memory I wasn't sure I wanted back. Doreen, my mother, called from the kitchen without turning around. "There you are, honey. Grab yourself a drink, will you? We're just about to sit down." No hug, no, "We missed you." Just utility. I walked into the dining room. It was exactly as I remembered it. Long table, formal runners, candles in the center, plates stacked in neat place settings. But mine stood out like a paper cut on polished skin. All the other chairs were heavy, dark wood. Mine was a fold-out, slightly dented, wobbling on the carpet. Everyone else had china, white with gold trim. Mine was a plastic plate with faded sunflowers, straight from the kids' shelf in the pantry. No one said a thing, not one word. I sat. Across from me, Marva adjusted her napkin and smiled in that way she does when she knows she's done something you're not allowed to name out loud. "We saved you a spot," she said, like it was a joke only she could laugh at. My brother Troy raised a brow, but didn't intervene. His wife gave me a brief, sympathetic glance before redirecting her attention to their youngest. Even Dad just patted his stomach and muttered something about being ready for the ham. I stared at the plate, then the glass, then the water stain beneath it. The thing is, when someone hands you invisibility in pieces, a plate, a chair, a silence, you start to assemble them into a shape that looks a lot like being erased. Dinner passed in fragments, conversations about college decisions for Noah, Marva's art exhibit in Portland, Troy's promotion. I offered nothing, no one asked. When dessert was cleared, and the last fork clinked against the edge of someone else's plate, Doreen clapped her hands and said, "Let's do the toast." This had always been Marva's moment. She stood, wine in hand, ready to perform. "This year," she began, eyes bright, voice too smooth, "I just want to say how grateful I am for everyone at this table. To Mom, for pulling this off every year. To Dad, for being the best lawn light installer in Idaho. To Troy, for stepping up at work and still being super dad. And little Noah, for learning how to tie his shoes. Finally." Laughter, applause, a few cheers, then silence. And that was it. No Thalassa, no, "We're glad you came." Not even a fake nod to "everyone here." I raised my glass like the rest, swallowed the same wine, forced the same chuckle. But inside, I felt it. That quiet snap. The small, soundless kind that comes just before something shifts permanently. Dad added a story about Marva's first art show, how proud he'd been when she sold 3 pieces on opening night. Marva beamed. I listened. I'd had a gallery spot once. Nobody in this room had ever mentioned it. My gaze dropped back to the plate. The plastic one. A drop of cranberry sauce had hardened in a spot just beside my fork. I picked up my glass again, held it carefully. My fingers tightened around the stem, not out of anger, but clarity. I could still hear them laughing, even though the sound no longer landed. It hovered. Something in me slowed. Not sadness. Not even resentment. Something cleaner. I blinked once. Then again. Not because I needed to, but because I knew what came next would need my full attention. The gift exchange always happened after dessert. It was Marva's rule, and no one ever questioned her rules. Not even our mother, who usually had something to say about everything. The kitchen still smelled of nutmeg and ham glaze. Conversation had settled into a comfortable buzz, and the wine bottle was down to its last pour. My breath was steady, movements controlled, but I could feel something taut just beneath my skin. I carried the gift bag to the tree, the one with gold twine handles, and a hand-cut tag that said, "To Noah, from your Aunt T." The handwriting was mine, and shaky, not because I was nervous, but because I had written it weeks ago while trying not to cry. Inside was a frame I had designed myself, a collage of family photos, Noah with frosting on his nose at age 2, him asleep on Marva's shoulder during a fireworks show, a snapshot of me holding him at his preschool graduation. I'd printed the photos on soft textured paper, mounted them on cream cardstock, layered it with pressed sage leaves. Simple, gentle, thoughtful. Noah pulled it out slowly, then turned to his mother like he was unsure. Marva didn't miss a beat. She took it from him, held it up to the light, then tilted her head like she was looking at a garage sale find that didn't quite pass inspection. "Oh," she said, letting the syllable stretch. "This might be better out in the garage. Not exactly our vibe, but thoughtful." I heard it. So did everyone else. No one flinched. Mom let out a tiny laugh, the kind you make when you don't want to disagree in front of company. Dad avoided eye contact. Noah looked down at the carpet. The gift was set aside, off to the corner, leaning against the wall behind the armchair. I didn't say anything. I just folded my hands in my lap and nodded. Not to anyone in particular. Just to the moment. I wasn't surprised. That was the worst part. It had happened before, in smaller ways. A comment about my clothes, a joke about my job, a polite correction to my tone, little edits to make sure I never got too confident, too seen. But this wasn't a jab. This was a clean erasure. They didn't want my gift, but more than that, they didn't want me to believe I belonged enough to give one. I cleared my throat once, softly. The room moved on. Later, someone passed around hot cider. Marva poured herself more wine. The kids ran off to play in the den. I took the empty plate in front of me and walked it to the kitchen sink. On the way back, Marva looked over at me, already halfway into a conversation I hadn't been invited to. "So, Thalassa," she said, voice syrupy, "you still doing those little side gigs or whatever?" I hesitated, then said evenly, "Actually, I just started working on a design contract for a cafe opening in Seattle. It's a slow start, but it's mine." She gave me that look. The one that said, "How adorable." Then, with no warning, she said it. "Honestly, if you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. You've been gone for 2 years and what's really changed?" Silence swallowed the room. I heard the clink of Dad's fork against his plate. Someone cleared their throat, maybe Doreen, but no one objected. No one defended. My chest didn't tighten, my hands didn't shake. Instead, I reached for my glass, half full, red. I raised it, lightly, as if offering a toast, and I said, "Challenge accepted." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every head turned. Even Noah looked stunned. For a split second, Marva's face faltered, just slightly, before the smirk returned. "I'm gonna get some air," I said, standing. I walked toward the back door. No one followed. No one said a word. The cold outside didn't bother me. I didn't pull my coat tight. I didn't pace. I just stood there, on the back porch, watching the snow fall in soft spirals onto the unshoveled path. The world was quiet in that way. It only gets after a fresh snowfall. Like the earth was holding its breath, waiting for someone to decide what came next. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt finished. Inside, they were probably pouring more wine, probably laughing again, probably pretending they hadn't just applauded my disappearance. That was the last time I sat at that table. I didn't go back to the living room. Instead, I walked the long hallway toward the guest room, the one that used to be mine. The carpet muffled my steps, and I passed the same framed photos that had always lined the wall. Marva's wedding, Noah's birth announcement, Troy holding a fish on some lake I'd never been invited to. Nothing of me. Nothing that said, "She mattered here." The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the room was cold and smelled like old books and furniture polish. The bed was made with mismatched sheets, pale blue over a floral base, and one of the pillows was flat as a board. On the dresser sat a lamp that buzzed faintly when turned on, the light casting uneven shadows across the walls. I didn't change clothes. I just lay there, fully dressed, arms folded over my chest, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. I wasn't restless, just awake. It wasn't the wine. It wasn't the cold. It was the ache of being done with something I hadn't fully known I was still trying to fix. Around 1 a.m., I got up. I crossed the room and opened the bottom drawer of the old dresser, the one that used to hold my sketchbooks and friendship bracelets. Now it held photo albums, the heavy kind wrapped in plastic, with thick black pages and photo corners that always smelled faintly of glue. I took the top one out, sat cross-legged on the floor, and opened it. At first, it looked like what you'd expect. My parents' anniversary party, Marva's art showcase, Troy's backyard barbecue. All the familiar faces arranged in neat smiles, holding plates of food, or toddlers, or sparklers. But something started to feel off the further I flipped. Where was I? I wasn't just missing, I was edited out. One page showed Marva's birthday dinner. I had been there. I remembered the gold paper crowns and the burnt creme brulee. But the photo on the page cut off abruptly. On the right edge of the frame, you could see a sliver of a sleeve. My sleeve. I remembered that shirt. Linen, pale green, thrifted in Capitol Hill. Page after page. I was absent from family vacations I had helped plan. From group photos I had stood in. From moments where I knew I had spoken, laughed, held someone's baby. Gone. The absence was so precise, it almost felt intentional. I closed the book, slid it back into the drawer, and stood up. On the nightstand sat a sealed card. A Christmas card, the kind Doreen gave out every year. The envelope was gold-trimmed, my name in cursive, misspelled in that way she always wrote it, 2 S's instead of 1. I'd noticed it since middle school. She never corrected it. I opened the card and looked inside. The fold line was deep, clearly worn. The message inside was generic, printed. Wishing you a season of joy and peace. Below it, written in blue pen, "With love, Mom and Dad." But in the top right corner, faded and barely visible, was a date. Last year's date. They'd recycled it. Not even re-signed it. Just reused it like a piece of wrapping paper too good to toss. I ran my thumb along the crease and stared at it for a moment longer than I meant to. Then I folded it again, precisely, sharply, and tucked it into the side pocket of my suitcase. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I needed a reminder, a marker. I sat on the edge of the bed, not crying, just taking it in. There's a moment, I think, when you stop hoping for better and start taking notes. Like a journalist at a crime scene, recording the evidence, not trying to clean it up. I stood again and opened the top drawer. Inside was another card. One I had written to Marva. It had a sunflower on the front and said, "You're appreciated." I'd written it the year I missed Thanksgiving because I was sick, and she had brought over soup, store-bought, but still. I'd wanted to say thank you. It was never opened, still sealed, still waiting. I picked up a pen from the windowsill and turned the recycled Christmas card over. On the blank side, I wrote, "Thank you for showing me who I am in your story." I placed it on the dresser. Not to be seen, just to exist. Then I crawled under the covers. I didn't set an alarm. I didn't plan my escape. Not yet. But something inside me had already started packing. Morning crept in slow and gray, settling over the windowsills like dust. I opened my eyes before the rest of the house stirred. The hallway was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt padded, like something important had already been said, and no one wanted to mention it again. I dressed in yesterday's sweater and socks, not because I didn't have fresh clothes, but because I didn't want to feel new in a house that had clearly decided I no longer belonged. The walls along the staircase were lined with photos, family milestones captured, printed, framed. I stopped at the one of Marva's baby shower. Everyone was there, even our aunt from Spokane. I had taken the photo. In the kitchen, the coffee was already brewed. Doreen stood at the stove, humming tunelessly while flipping pancakes. Marva leaned against the counter, holding the morning paper like she owned the news. Virgil was planted in his recliner, TV already on, volume low, sports muted. None of them looked up. "Good morning," I said. No one responded. I poured myself a cup, adding too much sugar out of muscle memory. Then I walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, careful not to shift the decorative pillows Marva arranged the night before, like she was prepping for a magazine shoot. Noah was sprawled across the rug, surrounded by colored pencils and poster board. He beamed when he saw me. "Want to see what I made?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. He held up a homemade family tree. Markers labeled each branch: Grandma Doreen, Grandpa Virgil, Uncle Troy, Aunt Marva, and of course, me. There were stickers beside each name, stars, hearts, even a smiley face wearing sunglasses. I leaned in. One branch sat empty. No name, no sticker, just a line. "A placeholder?" I asked gently. "And this one?" He didn't look up from his work. "That one doesn't count. Mom said it used to be someone, but they don't come around much now." I froze. He said it with the casual cruelty of a child repeating something he didn't fully understand. But Marva understood. She didn't look at me. She just sipped her coffee like it was some regular Tuesday, not Christmas morning. Doreen remained by the stove, flipping another pancake like the silence wasn't thudding between us. I wanted to scream. Not from pain, but from recognition. This wasn't about forgetting. It was deliberate. I nodded slowly. "Looks good," I said to Noah, even though my voice cracked a little on the word good. He smiled, proud of his work, and went back to coloring. I stood, walked into the dining room, and sat down at the empty table. Wrapping paper was still scattered from the night before, some crumpled near the fireplace. The room smelled faintly of pine and syrup. There was no one around. No one noticed me go. I pulled a piece of wrapping paper from the corner, silver with faded snowflakes, and flattened it out. Found a pen near the napkin holder. I didn't pause to think, I just wrote. "If memory is where family lives, I guess I've already moved out." I didn't sign it. I didn't fold it with care. I just shaped it into a loose triangle and placed it in the center of the table, where someone might find it or throw it away. Either one seemed fitting. Back in the guest room, I unzipped my suitcase and started placing things inside. The jeans I hadn't worn, the charger by the lamp, the cardigan draped over the chair, nothing dramatic, no slamming drawers, just quiet motions. I paused at the nightstand and picked up the photo of me and Marva from high school prom. We weren't close even then, but we looked like we could have been. I left it where it was. That version of us no longer existed. I changed into travel clothes, something loose, comfortable, neutral. I didn't plan to say goodbye. I didn't need to. As I zipped the suitcase closed, I looked around the room one last time. It had changed so much over the years. Once mine, now temporary, hollowed out. Just like my place in this house. I turned off the light, not because it was late, but because I had already left in every way that mattered. By the time I made it back downstairs, the house had taken on that post-meal hush, low conversation, faint clatter of forks, the hum of the dishwasher pushing along behind the scenes like an ignored servant. The living room was dim, lit mostly by the flickering fireplace and the glow of the flat screen where muted football highlights looped endlessly. Nobody noticed me return. Nobody looked up. They never do. I walked through the dining area without pausing, stepping into the kitchen like a guest who had overstayed her welcome but decided to clean up out of obligation. The sink was stacked with plates, some still smeared with cranberry sauce and congealed gravy. Someone had half-heartedly scraped a dish before abandoning the effort. I rolled up the sleeves of my sweater, filled the sink, and began rinsing one plate at a time. No gloves, no sponge, just my bare hands and hot water. I wasn't in a rush. The task was familiar, mindless in a way that gave me space to think. Every year, it had fallen to me to handle the cleanup. Unspoken, unassigned, automatic. Doreen drifted in, glanced over her shoulder like she was checking inventory. "You're always so helpful, sweetie," she said, placing a mug in the sink without making eye contact. Then she was gone, off to join the others with a casualness that made my stomach knot, not in anger, but in something quieter, something close to finality. I washed 4 more dishes before I stopped. The faucet was still running, steam rising in soft curls, but I didn't reach for the next plate. I turned the handle slowly until the water stilled. My hands hovered in the basin for a moment longer, warm and red. I dried them mechanically, wiped them against my jeans, and stepped out of the kitchen. Marva was reclined on the couch, one leg crossed over the other, a half-full glass of wine balanced on the armrest. She looked up as I entered, but said nothing. I stood there, not at a distance, not close, just far enough that she would have to hear me clearly. "You will not treat me this way again." She blinked but didn't interrupt. "If you do," I continued, "the next time I disappear, it won't be temporary." Silence. Then, slowly, she smirked. That same amused, patronizing tilt of the lips she used when she knew she'd said something cruel but didn't care enough to backtrack. "Wow," she said, voice low. "That's dramatic? Even for you?" I didn't flinch. "I mean, come on," she went on, taking a sip. "You show up once every few years, hand out your little handmade gifts like they mean something, and expect a parade? This isn't a therapy session, Thalassa. It's Christmas." She chuckled, like she'd landed a punchline. No one laughed with her. No one stopped her either. I turned to look at Doreen, sitting stiff on the edge of the love seat, her mouth tight but unmoving. "She's your sister," was all she managed to say, and even then, it sounded more like a duty than a defense. "I was," I replied, eyes steady. "I was your daughter, too." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just walked back into the guest room, gathered my bag from the corner, and zipped it closed. The house felt smaller than ever, like it had been built to fit a version of me that no longer existed, and never truly had. I slid on my coat, draped my scarf once around my neck, and picked up the charger I'd left beside the lamp. There was no goodbye. I didn't offer one, and no one asked for it. When I stepped into the foyer, the air from outside swept in through the narrow opening as I cracked the front door. A gust hit the hallway, lifting a corner of the holiday rug. I paused just long enough to steady it with my foot. Behind me, the murmuring resumed. Football, laughter, a clink of glass, and then I was out. The cold was immediate but crisp, honest. Snowflakes drifted down, lighter now, but constant. I walked without urgency, suitcase wheels bumping unevenly over the brick pathway that hadn't been cleared since the storm. I reached the curb before I looked back. The windows glowed, golden and soft. From the outside, it looked like any other cozy family holiday, a Norman Rockwell moment frozen in glass. But I knew better. Behind that warmth were sharp edges, softened by tradition, hardened by habit. I had lived in those walls long enough to know that sometimes the most polite silences are the most dangerous. They rewrite you, shrink you, until you forget you were ever full-sized to begin with. I took a deep breath, reached into my pocket, and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with a map and a rideshare ETA. 5 minutes. 5 minutes until I wasn't standing in front of their house anymore. 5 minutes until I stopped pretending it had ever been mine. By the time the rideshare pulled up, snow was already layering my suitcase wheels. I didn't look back as I stepped in. The driver didn't ask questions, just confirmed my address in Seattle and started the quiet engine. The lights of my parents' house faded behind the condensation on the window. 3 months passed. Not rushed, not lost. Just mine. Seattle gave me space. My new apartment was small but serviceable. A converted unit above an old florist shop that still carried the scent of eucalyptus in its stairwell. I furnished it with thrifted chairs, an inherited desk from a Craigslist trade, and a lamp that flickered slightly if I breathed too close. But it worked. It was enough. Most mornings started the same. Pour coffee, feed the cat I'd impulsively adopted from the shelter, then turn to the tray table I used as a workbench. My hands stayed busy with metal, wire, and stone. I sold earrings made from repurposed keyholes, bracelets strung from discarded guitar strings. I called it salvaged because that's what I was doing, piecing value from what had been overlooked. It was raining that day, a steady, unbothered rain tapping on the window like a metronome. I had just finished a small batch of copper rings when a knock sounded at the door. Not frantic, not hesitant, just official. When I opened it, no one was there. Only a manila envelope lying flat on the welcome mat, edges darkened by moisture. The return address was a local bank. I carried it to the kitchen counter, opened it slowly, carefully, like whatever was inside might change shape if I moved too fast. The words hit all at once. Loan confirmation. Cosigner Thalassa Quinn. Property address, Seattle, WA. Registered to Marva Elaine. I blinked. I wasn't dreaming. My name was on the dotted line. Co-borrower, financially liable, with a signature that looked familiar. Because it was mine. An old version of it. From the year before I'd stopped trusting anything that came in the mail. I felt heat rise, not panic, but precision. A laser focus. I picked up my phone and called the customer service line. The woman on the other end was polite, overly so, like someone reading from a script that barely contained empathy. Unfortunately, ma'am, we can't remove your name from the mortgage unless the primary borrower refinances. You would need her consent. I laughed once, short and sharp. That's not going to happen. I ended the call and set the phone down. For the first time in weeks, I sat still. No jewelry tools in my hand, no metal to distract me. Just the growing knowledge that even from miles away, Marva had found a way to use me. It wasn't the money, it was the audacity. The assumption that I would never find out, that she could carry on borrowing my presence without ever acknowledging my value. I closed the envelope and took a photo of every page. Then, I found the number for a neighborhood legal aid center. They booked me for the following morning. The next day, I dressed in jeans and a black hoodie, practical and quiet. The office was 3 blocks from my apartment, tucked between a laundromat and a small cafe. The waiting room had 2 plastic chairs and a heater that clicked every few minutes. The woman who met me was young, maybe 30, but had the calm of someone who'd seen too much bureaucracy to be rattled by it anymore. She took notes as I spoke, nodding, only interrupting to clarify spelling or dates. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "We can file a report for fraud and initiate a formal request to the bank to remove you, but it might get messy." I smiled without warmth. "It already is." She handed me a pen. I signed the paperwork with a signature that was sharper now, less round, less trusting. At the bottom of the affidavit, beneath the statement, "I declare this to be true under penalty of perjury," I paused, then signed. No trembling, no hesitation. I left the office just before noon. The rain had stopped. The air felt cleaner. As I stepped outside, I took a deep breath and muttered to myself, not for the first time, but maybe the most clearly, This is the last thing she'll ever do in my name. That night, I didn't go out. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even order takeout. Instead, I boiled pasta, added canned tomatoes, and a splash of the cheap red wine I'd been saving for no particular reason. While it simmered, I leaned against the counter, phone in hand, reading the email again and again. Thalassa Quinn has been selected as one of this year's Community Changemakers. We'd be honored to recognize your work with Salvaged at our upcoming civic event. It wasn't a massive award. It wasn't televised. It didn't come with a check or a shiny medallion. But it was real. Someone had seen what I built with my hands, what I grew from scraps. 2 weeks later, I stood in the Civic Center's side hallway, waiting for my cue. The heels on my boots clicked softly on the tile. I'd made the necklace I was wearing, brass washers strung on silk cord, imperfect but intentional. My suit was simple, black, tailored. My name tag read, Artist as Educator. Behind the curtain, the host's voice filled the room. He butchered the name before mine, then said mine slowly, like he was tasting it. And next, someone whose work turns discarded metal into dignity, Thalassa Quinn. Applause. Clear, warm, undeservedly loud. I stepped onto the stage. The lights weren't bright enough to blind me, but just enough that I couldn't fully make out the faces in the crowd. That helped. They didn't need to know everything. They just needed to hear the right pieces. I thanked the committee, the neighborhood groups who'd partnered with me, and the kids who stayed late after school just to hammer copper sheets with their initials. And then I said something that surprised even me. They say we become who we're remembered by. I used to think that meant family. Now I know. It means the people who choose to see you. Not a single tear. No trembling. Just a pause, then quiet applause again. This time, it wasn't polite. It was full. My plaque read, Creative Advocate, Thalassa Quinn. After the ceremony, people came up to shake my hand. A city council member, a retired teacher, the head librarian from the Central Branch. One of the kids' moms brought me a handwritten card and hugged me longer than I expected. What didn't happen? No text from Marva, no call from Doreen, no voicemail from Dad saying he heard I'd done something useful for once. But I didn't look for any of it. 3 days before the event, I'd gotten a message from Marva. It was short and smug. Heard about your little award. If I'm not invited, I'll just show up anyway. I didn't respond. I didn't share the date or the time. I didn't forward the invite. I didn't owe her a front row seat to something she never believed I could build. And she didn't come. Of course she didn't. Showing up would have required more than proximity. It would have required effort. Back at home that night, I slipped off my boots and peeled the backing from the award plaque to mount it on the wall above my desk. I centered it between a pair of framed student drawings and the first newspaper clipping that mentioned Salvaged. The only empty space left on the wall was where I'd once pinned family holiday cards. I'd taken them down a few months ago and never replaced them. It didn't feel like a protest. It felt like alignment. The next morning, I received a voicemail. Not from Marva. From Clara, Troy's wife. Hi, Thalassa. I don't want to intrude, but I just wanted to say I saw the article online. What you're doing is beautiful. I've always thought so. She hesitated. I should have said something sooner. At Christmas, last year. When Marva made that joke. I didn't laugh. I didn't speak either. I regret that. Just wanted you to know. I played the message once, then again. I didn't call back. Not out of resentment, but because there wasn't anything else to say. She wasn't wrong. She just wasn't early. That night, I wrote in my journal, some silences are soft and healing. Others are sharp and shaped like permission. Then I circled the date of the next Salvaged workshop. The seats were full. The workshop ended just after 6. I stayed behind to wipe down the folding tables and refill the storage bins, letting the sound of the city beyond the windows replace the usual post-class chatter. It had become routine, clean, organize, lock up, and it grounded me more than I admitted. The kids had left behind scraps of copper and half-finished designs, but they also left energy in the room. The good kind. The kind that doesn't need to be earned or explained. By the time I walked back to my apartment, dusk had rolled in. The studio lights from the cafe below cast a warm wash across my ceiling. I set down my bag, turned on the kettle, and let my body relax into the pace I'd learned to call my own. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, planning to answer emails. Instead, a notification caught my eye. One of the local youth nonprofits had posted a video. The thumbnail was familiar, the wide grin of Lila, one of my most consistent students, her curly hair tucked under a denim cap. I clicked play. The clip was shaky but clear. Lila stood in front of a wall of framed student art, holding one of her copper pendants in her hand. "Before this, I didn't think anything I made mattered," she said. "But Ms. Quinn told me I wasn't just a background character." Her voice trembled slightly near the end, not from nerves, but conviction. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't move me, but because it felt whole. Clean. Comments started appearing underneath. Names I didn't recognize. Teachers, social workers, even a couple from other states. This is what art education should be. Her work is changing the way our kids see themselves. Ms. Quinn is the kind of mentor I wish I had growing up. For a long moment, I just sat there, hands still on the keyboard, eyes fixed on the screen. I wasn't a name in the background anymore. I was in full frame, on purpose. Then another message arrived. Not a comment, an email. Subject line: "Apology I should have said out loud." From Clara. I didn't open it immediately. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself some tea, added lemon. Then I returned, sat down, and clicked. "I remember the joke Marva made," it began. "I remember everyone laughing. I didn't. But I didn't say anything either. I should have. I'm sorry." There was no fluff, no strings. I read it again. Then, once more. The words didn't erase anything, but they untangled a knot that had been sitting behind my ribs for too long. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing else I needed her to say. Sometimes people arrive too late for the rescue, but right on time for the reckoning. I closed the message and leaned back in my chair. A soft knock of rain started at the window, just enough to feel like Seattle was exhaling with me. That's when the second message came in. Not Clara. Marva. "I was wrong," she wrote. "You've made your point. If you ever want to talk, I'm still your sister." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could have responded. I could have sent her the same kind of silence I'd received so many times. Or I could have let the floodgates open, told her about the mortgage, the dinner, the years I spent trying to earn a place that was never truly offered. Instead, I did none of it. I clicked Mark as Read, then opened my journal and flipped to the next empty page. "Forgiveness doesn't always come with a conversation," I wrote. "Sometimes it's just a decision not to carry them anymore." I put the pen down, closed the notebook. Then I walked over to the door, locked up the studio, and stepped outside. The streets were slick but quiet, lit with the yellow glow of street lamps reflecting off damp pavement. My coat was warm enough. My breath left me in slow ribbons. I didn't check my phone again. I didn't think about what she'd hoped I'd say back, because I knew the truth. Some messages don't deserve replies. That morning began like any other in winter. Gray sky, the hum of the baseboard heater, the clink of a spoon against ceramic as I stirred honey into my coffee. A slow, uneventful December 24th. Outside, mist hugged the streets. The windows fogged slightly from the difference in temperature. I wiped the corner with the sleeve of my cardigan and looked out. Pedestrians with bundled scarves moved in pairs, arms locked. A family passed by, a small child on a parent's shoulders, pointing at window displays. There was no bitterness in my chest, just space, a kind of calm I had never associated with holidays. On the kitchen counter sat a familiar envelope, pale blue. My name written in my mother's handwriting, rounded cursive, the loop in the Q too large, the same way it had always been. I hadn't opened it, I wouldn't. Not because I was angry. That had passed. It wasn't grief either. It was completion. The card had arrived 2 days ago. No return address, but I didn't need one. I knew the tone before I even touched it. Likely some bland holiday well-wishing, the kind that stretched the word love thin without ever acknowledging the shape of the harm that came before it. I didn't throw it away. I just let it sit, like a ghost with no power anymore. I turned back to my small dining table. It was already set, linen napkin, real silverware, a wine glass with no smudges, and one plate. White ceramic with a faint blue ring I had picked up from a flea market my second month in Seattle. No plastic, no disposable cutlery, no folding chairs, just mine. I lit the candle at the center of the table. It wasn't about ambiance. It was about presence. Proof that I was here, that I took up space, that I didn't need anyone to make it valid. The short ribs were slow cooking in the oven. Same recipe I'd used the night I filed the legal papers against Marva. It felt right to make them again. Ritual by reclamation. I set a small ornament next to the candle, one of the handmade pieces I had brought to Christmas last year. The one they'd chuckled at and shoved to the side like a child's art project. Now it hung above my desk, but tonight it earned a place at the table. The apartment was quiet. The only sound was the low jazz from the speaker and the soft boil of the pot on the stove. I moved slowly through the space, taking in how much had changed in a year. How much I had changed without asking permission. When the timer rang, I plated the food carefully, drizzling the sauce with the same kind of intention I once used to avoid saying what I really felt. That precision now had a different purpose. I took my seat. I didn't toast to anything. I didn't light a second candle in memory of people who had chosen absence. I just took a bite. It was enough. After dinner, I poured myself a glass of red wine, opened my journal, and flipped past pages filled with anger, confusion, then clarity. I stopped on a fresh page. I wrote, I thought I needed to be remembered to matter, but I only needed to remember myself, clearly and kindly. I looked up at the card again, still sealed, still untouched. I reached for it, not to open, but to put it away. I walked to the drawer, where I kept a few keepsakes, a dried flower from my first market booth, my name tag from the Changemaker event, a photo of me and the first class of kids I taught. I placed the envelope there, not as a treasure, but as a boundary. There's a difference. I stood by the window, wine in hand, and watched as snow began to fall. Not in heavy flurries, but soft, like ash. In another house, not far from here, they were probably passing dishes, snapping wishbones, acting out their usual holiday pageant. Someone might mention my name, someone might not, but it didn't change this. This year, I didn't disappear. I just chose not to be where I wasn't seen. There's something I've learned in the quiet after a storm like this, the kind that doesn't come with thunder, but with silence. It's that sometimes, the hardest kind of healing is the one you have to do alone. Not because no one loves you, but because the people you needed love from couldn't show up the way you deserved. I spent a long time thinking forgiveness had to be a handshake, a sit-down, a phone call. But now, I know it can also be a boundary, a closed envelope, a meal you cook for yourself with care, because no one else taught you were worth it. If you've ever felt like the invisible one at the table, if you've been edited out of photos, out of stories, or out of someone's memory, this story is yours too. Maybe not the exact details, but the ache, the slow unlearning of shame, the choosing of peace over performance. And so, I want to ask you, have you ever walked away, not out of anger, but because it was the only way to remain whole? Have you ever had to rebuild your own name from the ground up? If this story touched a part of you, even just a small part, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Just type a 1 if you've ever had to start over. Or, if this story didn't resonate with you, tell me why. I read every comment. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories about resilience, quiet strength, and the power of walking away when you need to, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Just hit that button so you'll never miss the next story that might feel like it was written just for you. Until next time, be kind to yourself, especially on the days when no one else is.